In Red Willow, a tiny settlement lost among the dusty plains of Wyoming, life moved slowly. Everyone knew everyone and everything here, and they knew that ever since Rebecca Aldridge married the widower Edward Mason, his little daughter hadn't been herself. 7-year-old June Mason, a thin girl with large eyes and tangled blonde hair, bore all the marks of silent terror. Ever since her mother died, she had stopped speaking, as if words had left with the woman who sang to her at night. Now, instead of songs, there were shouts, slaps on the head, and long hours in the shed, when her stepfather went to town and her stepmother was left alone with her. June wasn't taken to town. Her clothes were always old, patched, and her face often dusty or with a bruise under her eye. Only an old stallion named Hatch, inherited from June's mother, remained her sole comfort. She would come to his stall, hug his neck, stroke his rough muzzle, and whisper silently, only her lips moving. But no one saw this, or pretended not to. One day everything changed. It was an evening when Ben Keller rode into town under the setting sun, a silent cowboy, a drifter with graying temples and a scar across his cheek. They called him the Mute because he hardly ever spoke, and if he did, it was short and to the point. He appeared at the hitching post to shoe his horse when he noticed something strange. A wagon, filled with straw, was passing the saloon. In it sat a woman with sharp features, Rebecca, and beside her, hunched over, clinging to the side, was a girl in a tattered dress. She met Ben's gaze. June's eyes were frightened, full of pleading. And then she raised her hand. Hesitantly, her trembling palm described a motion in the air, like a horse snorting, and then a fist to her chest and a finger pointing down. Someone who didn't know her would have taken it for a random gesture. But Ben stopped. He knew the deaf, and he knew sign language. He had seen it before with Native American children. It was an address, a plea. Help. The wagon disappeared around the corner, leaving only a swirl of dust. The next day, there was no sign of the girl, not in the saloon, nor in the church, nor by the well. Only in the general store did someone whisper that Rebecca had complained about a heavy burden and that the creature is mute anyway and won't ever gain sense. Her husband was out of town and no one checked where June was. To questions, Rebecca laughed coldly. Let them ask the wind. And the wind that night rose strong. It drove clouds across the sky and howled in the shutters as if it sensed something. And Hatch, the old horse, galloped around the corral, pawing at the ground and snorting towards the empty shed where the girl usually sat. His eyes were wild. And suddenly, without waiting for anyone, he knocked the gate latch with his tail and vanished into the darkness, as if following a scent no human could detect. The next day, Ben returned to that house. No one. Silence. Only the stallion Hatch stood before the barn, covered in sweat, foaming at the mouth, as if he had traveled dozens of miles, and he pawed the ground several times, in the same spot. Ben dismounted. He knelt down. The earth was loose. A little further, a strip of fabric. He began to dig. And a few seconds later, he recoiled in horror. There, in the earth, neck-deep in dusty, withered dirt, with parched lips and closed eyes, lay the girl. June, alive. Ben collapsed to his knees as soon as he saw the girl's eyes, murky, almost bleached by the sun. He heard a rasp tear from her parched throat. Not even a scream, just a moan, like an animal left for dead. He took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. Then he took out his flask, moistened her lips, carefully, drop by drop, pouring water into the corners of her mouth. She couldn't swallow. Her body refused to obey. He understood. If he didn't get her out now, she wouldn't last another hour or two. Hold on, little one, he breathed almost silently. I'm with you. He looked around. Not a soul. Only Hatch, standing nearby, shook his head and pawed the ground, as if urging him on. Ben pulled out his knife and began carefully tearing at the earth. First her shoulders, then her hands, wrapped in rope. Someone had deliberately buried her so she couldn't even move, so she wouldn't survive. How long had she been lying there? Judging by the sun, by the tracks, by her cracked skin, a day, maybe a little less. When he freed her completely, she couldn't stand. She simply sagged in his arms. He lifted her, wrapped her in his shirt, and without a word, mounted his horse, seating the girl in front of him. Hatch, as if understanding everything without words, turned towards town. At Dr. Thompson's house, a muffled knock sounded. Ben entered without waiting for an answer. The old physician in his nightshirt jumped up. "Lord, who is this?" "June Mason," Ben said hoarsely. "Alive, but won't last long without you." "Where did you—" the doctor began, but he saw the cowboy's face, and he didn't ask. He took the girl into his arms. She was rasping, her eyes closed. Her skin was sunburned, her lips cracked, her hair matted. But there was breath. Her heart was beating. She was holding on. "Get water bandages. I won't leave her," Ben said and retreated to a corner. When the doctor washed her, revived her, gave her medicine, Ben sat in the shadows like a statue. He didn't leave even when Mrs. Thompson entered the room with a bowl of broth and a blanket. No one drove him away. The town remembered how he had once saved the blacksmith's son from a rattlesnake. They remembered how he had refused payment, simply saying, "Other people's children are children too." June woke up on the third day. The first thing she saw was the stallion Hatch. He stood by the open window looking inside. Then, a man in the shadows. Ben got up, came closer, knelt down. She didn't speak. She just raised her hand and repeated that gesture, snorting, fist to heart, finger down. He understood. "Thank you." That evening, a rumor spread through Red Willow. Ben Keller found the mute girl buried alive. They say she's alive. They say the stepmother did it. They said different things. But the next day, a crowd stood outside the Mason's house. Sheriff Macklin, a tall man in a black shirt, knocked on the door. Rebecca opened it with a weary face and a false smile. "Where is the girl?" he asked. "She left with her father," she lied. The sheriff didn't reply. He just stepped back, gestured. And then Ben came out. He led Hatch with the girl sitting on his back, a yellow blanket on her shoulders, her hands bandaged, her face pale but alive. The crowd froze. Then someone began to whisper. Then, "Speak louder." "Is that her?" "They say the stepmother buried her." "She must be crazy. They should hang her." Rebecca paled, but she still held her ground. "You can't prove it," she shouted. "It's all lies. She's mute. She won't say anything." And then Ben stepped closer. He took the girl's hand and made that same gesture, snorting, fist to heart, finger down. And June replied, but this time aloud, hoarsely, weakly. "Yes." Rebecca was taken away in a wagon, without a word. The crowd was silent, but their gazes were heavier than stones. And the girl sat on the horse, holding the reins, and beside her walked Ben, step by step. So one life ended, and another began. A week after Rebecca was taken away, the town of Red Willow returned to its lazy, dusty life, but only on the surface. Inside, everything was simmering. Ben Keller moved June into his house, a small ranch beyond the creek. The house was simple. One bedroom, an old fireplace, wooden beams smelling of smoke. But it was warm there. It was quiet there. He didn't talk to her much. He himself spoke rarely. But every morning she would wake up to the sound of his footsteps on the porch. He was feeding the horses, and every night she would fall asleep to the creak of his chair by the fireplace. And that was enough. He didn't ask questions, but he memorized her every gesture. He learned to understand her at a glance, and she to trust. But on the 8th day after June's rescue, a man rode into town on the dusty road. Tall, with a faded hat, eyes that filled half his face. He held the reins with one hand, shading his face from the sun with the other. "That's Jack Mason," Sheriff Macklin said, looking out the window. "The father." "He was in Dodge, wasn't he?" the deputy grumbled. Selling cattle. He's back, the sheriff cut in. Half an hour later, Jack stood at his desk, listening to a short, cold report. Your wife has been arrested on charges of attempted murder of a child. The girl is alive. There are witnesses and testimony. Jack remained silent. Only the muscles in his jaw twitched. Where is she now? Who? June. Macklin didn't answer. He just glanced at the wall where a rifle hung. Jack understood everything. He left. That same evening, Ben hitched Hatch and took the girl deeper into the prairie, to an old ranch where there were almost no people. He felt something dark approaching. He didn't know why, but his heart told him. The father shouldn't be underestimated. He didn't know? He asked the sheriff when he came later. Possibly, Macklin replied. Or maybe he was pretending. Will he take her? He'll try. I won't let him. The sheriff looked into Ben's eyes. Everything was there. Rage, pain, determination. Then you should be ready. On the third night, the moon hung over the prairie like a lantern filled with milk. June sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, stroking Hatch's neck as he poked his muzzle inside. And suddenly the horse snorted and recoiled. At the same second, the crunch of a branch. Ben burst out of the bedroom with his rifle. On the porch stood Jack Mason, alone, unarmed, only a whip in his hand. You took my daughter, he said. I saved her, Ben replied. That's none of your business. She's not a thing. She's mine, by law. She's a person. Silence. Jack tightened his fingers on the whip handle. You don't know how she grew up, what she did. She had a tongue when her mother died, and then it disappeared. She's bad. She put a hex on Rebecca, he said, as if pronouncing a sentence. Ben stepped forward. Do you really believe that? Jack didn't answer. He just cracked the whip through the air. Empty. Ben didn't flinch. Leave, he said, or I'll shoot you. And then June emerged from behind Ben, slowly, quietly. She stood between them, without a sound, and made that gesture, snorting, fist to heart, finger down, but this time towards her father. Jack froze. It was a verdict. And then Hatch, as if understanding everything, reared up behind her. Jack retreated. You're crazy, he whispered. You two... And he left. That night, June sat by the fire, her head on Ben's shoulder. He didn't move. He just held her hand. There were no stars outside the window, only the horse, standing guard. And somewhere inside, they both knew this wasn't the end yet. Because some fathers don't back down, and some girls no longer hide. 3 weeks passed. Jack Mason didn't appear. The sheriff thought he had left. Ben knew he hadn't. People like Jack don't give up. They don't retreat. They wait. June felt it too. Every night she would go to the window and gaze into the darkness, as if sensing where the storm would come from. But she no longer hid. She didn't cower against the wall. She stood tall, walked freely through the house, and for the first time in all this time, she drew. On an old sheet of paper, she sketched in charcoal the silhouette of a horse and a girl pressing her forehead against its neck. Ben hung the drawing by the fireplace. And on the morning of the 8th day, before the fog had lifted, a wagon pulled up to the ranch gates. There were 3 men in it. Jack in front. With him, a man in a gray coat and a man with a rifle. Court representative, Ben exhaled, seeing the paper in one of their hands. The order states, the man read aloud, that citizen Jack Mason, as the sole living parent, has the right to take minor June Mason back into his custody. That's nonsense, Ben interrupted. She's a victim. I have witnesses, the sheriff's signatures. I'm enforcing the law, sir, the representative replied. Don't pass judgment yourself. Then you'll be delivering a girl to a murderer, Ben said and clenched his fist. You called me a murderer? Jack roared. You a snot-nosed kid with a horse who thinks he knows better? And then the cabin door opened. June came out herself, in a floor-length dress, with her hair loose. In her hand, a note. She silently approached the court representative. Handed him the paper. He unfolded it. This is, he began, reading. This is a confession? On the paper, I, Rebecca Mason, confess that I attempted to kill June, believing her to be a child of the devil. Jack knew, did not stop it. He believed it was an atonement. Below, a crooked signature. "Where did you get this?" the representative asked. "From the sheriff," Ben said. "He has a copy. I have the original." The representative slowly lowered the paper, looked at Jack, then at June, then back at the paper. I cannot hand over the child. This states a charge of complicity. I need to forward this to the district court." "You wouldn't dare!" Jack yelled. "It's all lies! A forgery!" "You can file a complaint," the representative replied evenly. "But until the circumstances are clarified, the girl remains here." "No!" Jack lunged at her. And then Hatch, who had been standing behind the house, stepped in front of the girl. He stood as he had that evening, chest forward, eyes burning, and he pawed the ground. "Get that animal away!" Jack screamed. "He protected her when you tried to kill her," Ben said, "and he'll do it again." Jack froze. His entire face was contorted. "You'll regret this!" he hissed. But the representative had already raised his hand. "Another step, and I'll be forced to arrest you, Mr. Mason." Jack left, and he didn't return. 3 weeks later, the district court ruled, due to the confession and the threat to the girl's life, temporary custody, with the prospect of permanent custody of June Mason, is granted to citizen Benjamin Keller. In the spring of that year, Red Willow held its first real celebration in a long time. Corn was roasted on the main street, a fiddle played, children rolled hoops. And by the hitching post stood a gray stallion, with a girl stroking his muzzle. Ben stood nearby. He wore a clean vest, and on his chest a medal for valor. The sheriff chuckled. "Never thought I'd live to see the day we'd hand out awards not for shooting, but for humanity." "Sometimes that happens," Ben said and looked at June. She looked back, and for the first time, she smiled. A genuine smile. That night by the fireplace, she drew a new picture. Now he was in it. With her, and with the horse between them, and in the corner, an inscription. "Family is not who you come from, it's who comes for you."